She died at age 7. That is what the record said. That is what the Air Force told everyone. That is what her name on the memorial wall said for 8 long years. But on a Tuesday morning above the Pacific Ocean, a quiet voice came through the radio. It said one word. Just one word. And 2 of the most trained, most experienced fighter pilots in the United States Air Force stopped breathing. Their hands left the controls. They did not move. They just sat there at 28,000 feet, completely frozen. Because the word they heard was Ghost. And Ghost had been dead for 8 years. Maya Reeves was 7 years old when the helicopter went down in the mountains of Nevada. It was a training flight. Her mother, Captain Sarah Reeves, was one of the Air Force's best pilots. She flew F-22 Raptors. She had the call sign Ghost. She earned that name not because she was invisible or quiet, but because she could do things in the air that nobody else could explain. Her commanding officer once said she flew in a space between possible and impossible, and always found a way through. She was 31 years old. She was the best they had ever seen. The helicopter that went down that day was carrying Captain Reeves and her daughter Maya. They were flying back from a family weekend near a mountain base. The weather changed fast. The pilot lost control of the aircraft in a sudden storm. The helicopter went down hard into a rocky slope at 9,000 feet. Emergency teams went out immediately. They found the wreckage the next morning. They found the pilot. They found Captain Sarah Reeves. Both gone. There was a child's bag near the crash. A small pink shoe. Search teams looked for 2 days. They found nothing else. The mountain was steep, the weather was still bad, and after 48 hours, they made the call. The little girl did not survive. Maya Reeves, age 7, was declared dead along with her mother. A memorial was held. Captain Reeves received full military honors. Her call sign, Ghost, was officially retired. No one would ever use that word again in her squadron. It belonged to her, and it would stay with her. Her name went on the wall at the Air Force Base where she had served. People cried. People saluted. Then life moved on, the way life always does, even when it should not. But Maya was not dead. She had been thrown from the wreckage on impact. She had rolled down a lower slope away from the fire. She was unconscious for hours. When she woke up, she was cold, she was bleeding from a cut on her head, and she had no idea where she was. She was 7 years old, alone in the mountains, and her mother was gone. She did not fully understand what that meant yet. She just knew she was cold and scared and she wanted someone to find her. Someone did find her. But it was not the search teams. Colonel James Okoro was a retired Air Force officer. He was 58 years old and he lived alone in a small cabin on the lower western side of that same mountain range. He had retired 5 years earlier after 30 years of service. He had no family nearby. He kept to himself. He was out walking early on the 3rd morning after the crash when he found a small girl curled up beneath a rocky overhang, wrapped in a torn piece of emergency foil from the wreckage. She was barely conscious. Her lips were blue. He picked her up and carried her 2 miles back to his cabin. He saved her life that morning. But what he did over the next 8 years was something much bigger. Colonel Okoro made a decision that very first day. He did not call the Air Force. He did not call the rescue teams. He checked the news that evening and he saw the headline. Child declared dead in mountain crash. He read the full report. He looked at the little girl sleeping in his guest room, bandaged and finally warm, and he thought for a long time. He had known Captain Sarah Reeves. Not closely, but he had watched her fly. He had been at a briefing once where she presented. He remembered thinking she was the finest natural pilot he had seen in 3 decades of service. He thought about what this child's life would look like if he called the authorities. She would go into the system. She had no father in the picture, no close relatives who had come forward. She would become a ward of the state at best. A file number. And everything her mother was, everything her mother had given her life to, would be completely unknown to the girl who carried her blood. So Colonel Okoro made a promise. He did not make it to anyone in particular. He made it to the memory of a woman he had barely known but deeply respected. He said out loud to the empty room, "Sarah, I am going to raise your daughter. I am going to teach her everything. I am going to make sure she knows exactly who her mother was. And I am going to keep her safe." He kept that promise for 8 years, every single day. Maya grew up in that mountain cabin and later in a small house in Colorado. Colonel Okoro, who she called Uncle James from the very beginning, was patient and careful and completely dedicated. He homeschooled her using structured programs. He taught her mathematics, science, history, and language with the same discipline he had brought to 30 years of military service. By age 10, Maya was doing high school level math. By age 12, she was reading aviation manuals for fun. Not because Uncle James forced her to. Because she wanted to. Because somewhere inside her, something already knew. The simulator came when she was 9. Uncle James had contacts in the aviation world. He spent several months gathering parts, buying old cockpit equipment, and building a replica Airbus A380 simulator in the garage of their Colorado home. It was not a toy. It had real instruments, real controls, real systems. A visiting pilot friend of Uncle James once sat in the simulator for 20 minutes and then came out and said, "James, that thing is more accurate than some training rigs I have used at actual airlines." Maya spent hours in that simulator. Every day after her schoolwork was done, she went into the garage. Uncle James taught her instrument reading, control feel, checklist procedures, communication protocols, and emergency response. He taught her the way Captain Reeves had been trained, methodically and completely. He did not let her rush. He made her repeat procedures until they were automatic. He made her practice engine failure scenarios until she stopped being afraid of them and started solving them calmly. He also told her about her mother. Everything he knew, and then everything he researched. He got hold of Sarah Reeves' service record through old contacts. He read Maya the commendations. He told her about the call sign Ghost, what it meant, why it was given, what kind of pilot earned a name like that. He showed Maya a photograph he had found in a military publication. Captain Reeves in full flight suit, standing in front of an F-22, smiling very slightly, the way someone smiles when they are exactly where they belong. Maya kept that photograph on the small shelf above her simulator seat. She looked at it every time she sat down to fly. By the time Maya was 15, she had over 700 hours in the simulator. She had completed every Airbus emergency checklist from memory. She could talk to air traffic control with the calm, flat voice of someone who had been doing it for years. Uncle James had her practice radio communication with retired pilots who agreed to run live ATC simulations over the phone, not knowing she was 15 and self-taught in a garage in Colorado. Then, 3 weeks before everything changed, Uncle James died. It was a heart attack. He was 66 years old. He had been healthy. It was fast. Maya was in the house when it happened. She called the emergency services. She sat with him until they came. He was already gone. She sat in the hospital waiting area for a long time after. She did not cry in the building. She waited until she was back at the house, in the garage, sitting in the simulator seat with the photograph of her mother on the shelf in front of her. Then she cried for a long time. 3 weeks later, she was on a plane. Uncle James had left careful instructions with a lawyer. There was money, not a large amount but enough. There were documents he had spent years carefully preparing. Legal papers that made Maya's situation real and official. Her identity, her records, her proof of existence. The lawyer had filed them and everything was in order. Maya was now legally, officially, uncomplicatedly alive for the first time in 8 years. The lawyer needed her to fly to a meeting in Washington, D.C. to finalize several last documents. Maya booked a seat on Pacific Coast Airlines Flight 2241, departing from Denver International Airport at 6:50 in the morning. She packed her backpack carefully the night before. The simulator notebook. The photograph of her mother. A sealed envelope addressed to the United States Air Force Headquarters that she had written and never sent. She had been carrying that envelope for 6 months. She was not sure she was ready for what happened when she sent it. But she was getting closer. Pacific Coast Airlines Flight 2241 was an Airbus A380. It was carrying 287 passengers and 14 crew. The flight to Washington was scheduled for 3 hours and 45 minutes. The sky was clear. The winds were light. It was, by every possible measure, a completely normal day to fly. Maya sat in seat 18A, window seat, economy class. She wore her gray hoodie and her dark jeans. She put her backpack under the seat in front of her. She closed her eyes as the aircraft climbed through 10,000 feet, and she ran through the aircraft in her mind the way Uncle James had taught her. Airbus A380. For Rolls-Royce Trent 970 engines. Fly-by-wire controls. Normal cruise altitude 35,000 to 40,000 feet. She knew the numbers the way other 15-year-olds know song lyrics. She knew the emergency checklists. She knew the radio frequencies. She knew the feel of the controls even though she had never touched real ones. She opened her notebook and tried to read. She managed 11 pages. Then everything changed. At 8:43 in the morning, Captain David Lim was flying the aircraft at 38,000 feet above eastern Colorado when he noticed his thoughts were becoming slow. It was a strange feeling. Not tired. Heavy. Like his thinking was moving through something thick. He blinked. He looked at the instruments. Everything was normal. Autopilot engaged. Both sets of engines running perfectly. Weather clear for the next 2 hours. Then he heard First Officer Claire Marsh say his name. Just his name, very slowly, and then she stopped speaking. He turned. She was slumped sideways in her seat. Her headset had slipped. Her hands were on her lap. She looked like someone who had simply fallen asleep mid-sentence. Captain Lim tried to reach for the radio. His arm felt like it belonged to someone else. One clear thought cut through the fog in his head. Carbon monoxide. The environmental control system. A seal somewhere in the bleed air circuit. He had seen a maintenance notice about it 2 weeks ago. He had assumed it was handled. His foot found the emergency floor switch. He pressed it once. It sent a signal to the lead attendant panel in the forward galley. That was the last thing he did before he slumped forward against his harness, unconscious at 38,000 feet. The aircraft kept flying. Steady, smooth, completely indifferent to what had just happened in the cockpit. Lead Flight Attendant Thomas Reyes saw the emergency light come on his panel. In 21 years of commercial aviation, he had never once seen it activate in actual flight. He had seen it in training many times. He knew exactly what it meant. He moved to the cockpit door, knocked in the crew pattern, entered the access code, and pushed the door open. He stood in the doorway for 2 seconds. Both pilots were down. He could see that immediately. He did not panic. His training moved him before his fear could. He got on the intercom. All crew, code red, cockpit emergency. He administered emergency oxygen to both pilots. He turned on the fresh air override for the cockpit. He checked for pulses. Both pilots were breathing. Both had pulses. Neither was responding. He sat in the captain's seat carefully, found the radio transmit button, and said the words that no flight attendant expects to say outside of a training room. Mayday. 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 Pacific Coast 2241. Both flight crew are unconscious. Suspected carbon monoxide. Aircraft on autopilot at 38,000 feet. No qualified pilot on board. 287 souls. Requesting immediate assistance. Denver Center responded in seconds. Emergency services at Dulles Airport were activated. Military air defense was notified. The airspace around Flight 2241 was cleared. Thomas Reyes sat in the captain's seat with his hands very carefully not touching the controls while he waited to hear from anyone who could help him. The cabin announcement went out at 8:51 in the morning. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your chief flight attendant, Thomas. We have a medical situation with our flight crew. The aircraft is flying safely on autopilot and we are in contact with air traffic control. We urgently need to know if anyone on board has flying experience of any kind. Please press your call button immediately if this applies to you. The cabin went very quiet. Then came the sound of 287 people understanding what they had just heard. A woman in row 4 grabbed the hand of the man beside her. A man in row 22 quietly said a prayer. Phones came out. People started calling home, saying things they had been saving. 3 people pressed their call buttons. A retired man in business class who had flown small propeller planes 25 years ago and had not touched controls since. A woman near the back who held a glider license. A teenage boy who said he had played flight simulator games for 3 years. The attendants thanked each of them and kept moving. None of them could fly this aircraft. The silence that followed was the heaviest kind. In seat 18A, Maya had heard the announcement. She was completely still. Her hands were flat on the cover of her closed notebook. She was looking out the window at the brown plains of eastern Colorado 38,000 feet below. She was doing arithmetic in her head. 287 lives. 0 qualified pilots. Fuel for approximately 2 more hours. The aircraft would keep flying on autopilot until the fuel ran out. Then the engines would stop. Then gravity would take the aircraft down into the ground. This was not a prediction. It was a calculation. Simple and total. She thought about Uncle James. Specifically, she thought about the last real conversation they had, 6 weeks before he died. He had looked at her across the kitchen table, very calm and very serious, and said, "Maya, everything I taught you was for a reason. You know that." She had nodded. He had said, "The world is unpredictable. If there is ever a moment where what you know is the only thing that saves people, you use it. Do not let being young stop you. Do not let being afraid stop you." Your mother was afraid every single time she flew. She flew anyway. That was what ghost meant. Not that she had no fear. That the fear never won. Be her daughter. She had promised him. She put her notebook in her backpack. She unclipped her seatbelt. She stood up. The man in seat 18B looked at her with red eyes. His phone was still in his hand. He had been saying goodbye to someone. He said, "Please, just sit down." She said quietly, "I need to get to the front. I can help." He stared at her. She stepped around him into the aisle. Flight attendant Rosa Medina moved toward her immediately, both hands raised, voice kind but firm. "Sweetheart, I need you to go back to your seat right now. Please." Maya stopped. She looked at the attendant. She spoke clearly, without rushing, without raising her voice. "My name is Maya Reeves. My mother was Captain Sarah Reeves, United States Air Force. Her call sign was Ghost. She flew F-22 Raptors. She was killed in a crash when I was 7. The world thinks I died with her. I did not. I was found and raised by a retired Air Force colonel named James Okoro. He spent 6 years building an Airbus A380 simulator in his garage and teaching me everything my mother knew. I have over 700 hours in that simulator. I know this aircraft's systems. I know the emergency checklists. I know how to communicate with air traffic control. I know how to land this plane. She paused for 1 second. I know how this sounds. I know what I look like. But there is no one else and I can do this. Please take me to the cockpit. Rosa stared at her. Something in the girl's voice was not the voice of a frightened child. It was flat and steady, the specific way that people are steady when they are not guessing. When they know something true. Rosa made a decision in about 3 seconds. She said, "Come with me. Right now." The cockpit of Pacific Coast Airlines Flight 2241 was exactly what Maya expected. The overhead panel, the center pedestal, the autopilot controls, the engine instruments, the navigation display. She knew where everything was. Uncle James had made her memorize the A380 cockpit layout until she could find any switch in the dark, literally in the dark with the lights off and her eyes closed. But knowing a thing in a simulator and being in it for real are two different things. The altimeter was showing real altitude. The airspeed tape was showing real speed. The NAV display was showing a real destination. And two real human beings were slumped unconscious beside her, kept alive by oxygen masks but not waking up, not responding, not here. She stood still for 1 second and let it be real. Then she moved. Thomas Reyes stood behind her. He said, "Before I step aside, tell me one thing. Tell me something only a real pilot would know about this aircraft right now." Maya scanned the overhead panel. She said, "Your number 3 hydraulic system is reading 2650 psi. Normal is 3000. It is within limits right now but I am going to watch it during descent. If it drops below 2400 I will need to know immediately." She looked at the fuel. 19.2 tons remaining. Approximately 1 hour 58 minutes to fuel exhaustion at current cruise settings. We need to be on the ground well before that. She looked at the autopilot display. The aircraft is currently set to continue to Dulles on the filed flight plan. That course is correct. I am going to leave the autopilot engaged until the top of descent. Thomas stepped aside. Maya climbed into the first officer's seat. She moved it forward. She buckled the 5-point harness. She put on the headset. She adjusted the microphone. She did every single step slowly and in the right order because Uncle James had told her 1,000 times, rushing in the cockpit is how people die. Deliberate is fast enough. She found the transmit button. She took one breath. Then she spoke. "Mayday. Mayday. Mayday. Denver Center. This is Pacific Coast 2241. I have taken control of the aircraft. I am not a certified pilot. I am 15 years old. My name is Maya Reeves. My mother was Captain Sarah Reeves, United States Air Force, call sign Ghost. She was killed 8 years ago. I was raised and trained by Colonel James Okoro, USAF retired. I have 700 hours in an Airbus A380 simulator. I need guidance for descent and landing at Dulles International. I can do this. Please respond." 7 seconds of silence. Then Denver Center said, "Pacific Coast 2241, we copy you. Stand by." Then something happened that nobody on any frequency expected. On a military operations channel running parallel to civilian air traffic control, 2 F-22 Raptors from the 120th Fighter Wing were on an air sovereignty patrol over the Colorado-Kansas border. They were flying at 28,000 feet, 55 miles northwest of the stricken airliner. The lead pilot was Major Eric Thorne. His wingman was Lieutenant Colonel Dana Voss. Dana Voss had flown with Captain Sarah Reeves for 3 years. She had been one of Sarah's closest friends in the squadron. She had held the folded flag at Sarah's memorial service. She had cried exactly once, alone in her car on the drive home afterward. She had not spoken the name Ghost since the day it was retired. When the civilian channel was patched through to military operations, both pilots heard Maya's transmission. They heard every word. They heard the call sign. Major Thorne later told investigators that when he heard the word ghost on that frequency, his hands left the throttle without any decision on his part. His body simply stopped. He said it felt like the world had changed the rules without telling him. Lieutenant Colonel Voss pressed her radio button and tried to speak. She tried twice. The third time, 4 words came out. Who is flying that aircraft? It was not a question. It barely sounded like speech. It was 4 words that she forced out through a throat that had closed around something she did not have a name for. Denver Center patched the military frequency through to Pacific Coast 2241. Maya heard the connection open. She pressed her transmit button. Lieutenant Colonel Voss. This is Maya Reeves. Sarah Reeves was my mother. I know you do not understand how I am alive. I will explain everything when this aircraft is on the ground. Right now I need your help to land it. Can you help me? The silence lasted 5 seconds. Major Thorne sat in his cockpit and waited. In 12 years of flying with Dana Voss he had never once heard her go silent. She always had words. She always had the next move. He waited. Then she said, Maya. Little Maya. I was at your mother's funeral. I carried the flag. Her voice was completely steady now. She had made a decision. She had decided this was the thing she was going to do and she was going to do it correctly. She said, I am 55 miles northwest of you. I am coming to you right now. You stay on the controls, you stay on the radio, and you do not let go. Do you understand me? Maya said, yes ma'am. Voss said to Thorne on their private channel, Afterburners. Thorne said, Afterburners. 2 F-22s lit up over Kansas and went supersonic. They covered 55 miles in under 4 minutes. When the 2 F-22 Raptors pulled into formation alongside Pacific Coast Flight 2241, one on each wing, Maya saw them from the cockpit window. She did not take her eyes off the instruments for long. But she saw them. Sleek and dark and impossibly fast, now slowed to match the careful pace of the heavy Airbus. Her mother had flown those aircraft. Her mother had been one of the finest people who ever flew those aircraft. And now those aircraft were outside her window because she was her mother's daughter, and apparently that still meant something. Lieutenant Colonel Voss came on the radio. No reassurances. No soft words. She spoke to Maya the way you speak to a pilot in a difficult situation. Directly and specifically and without waste. Maya, fuel state. 19.1 tons. Approximately 1 hour 55 minutes. Good. Dulles is 210 nautical miles ahead. We begin descent in 9 minutes. Walk me through your descent profile. Maya closed her eyes for 2 seconds. She said, I will hold cruise for 8 more minutes, then begin descent at 1,400 feet per minute. Airspeed reducing from cruise through 280 knots in mid-descent. Configure for approach at 10,000 feet. Flaps incremental, full flaps by 2,000 on final. Target approach speed of 142 knots at current weight. Voss said, that is correct. Then she said, Okoro taught you that. Yes ma'am. Brief silence. He was a good man. And your mother would have accepted that descent profile completely. In the cabin, Thomas Reyes made a second announcement. He told the passengers that a person with flight training had taken the controls. He told them that military aircraft were flying alongside them. He did not tell them the pilot was 15 years old. He made that decision in about 2 seconds and did not regret it. What the passengers saw through the oval windows were 2 fighter jets, one on each side, flying in tight formation with the airliner. The effect on the cabin was immediate. People who had been crying went quieter. People who were praying kept praying, but the register changed. Less desperate. More steady. The fighter jets meant something. They meant the world had noticed this aircraft and had sent its fastest, most capable aircraft to stand beside it. A man in row 7, a father of 3 from Denver, had been staring at his phone for 20 minutes. When he saw the F-22 outside his window, he put the phone in his pocket. He looked at the wing. He thought, we are going to land. A woman near the back who had been holding a stranger's hand since the first announcement looked at the jet and felt something change in her chest. Not calm exactly, but less afraid. The descent began 9 minutes later. Maya disengaged the altitude hold and manually input the descent rate. Her hands moved precisely. Small corrections. Watching the instruments the way Uncle James had trained her to watch them. Never staring at one thing. Always moving. Always checking. Airspeed, vertical speed, altitude, engine thrust. Scanning them in the same sequence every time. The way a heartbeat checks itself, automatically, without drama. Voss called every altitude through 30,000. Speed checks. Flap confirmations. She talked to Maya the way a good instructor talks to a good student. Not guiding her hand but making sure she had everything she needed. Through 20,000 feet, the green hills of Virginia appeared in the distance. Through 15,000, Washington, D.C. was visible to the north. Through 10,000, Maya could see the airport clearly. A long flat complex near water. She could see the runways. Voss said, configure for approach. Gear on my mark. Ready. Mark. Gear down. Maya reached for the landing gear lever and moved it to the down position. She watched the panel. 3 green lights came on one by one. She said, 3 greens. Nose, left main, right main. All down and locked. Voss said, perfect. Flaps to full. You are cleared for runway 01 right. It is the longest runway at Dulles. Emergency services are staged. Everything is ready. All you have to do is fly the approach. Maya said, understood. Voss paused for one moment. Then she said, your mother used to say something before every difficult approach. She would say, the sky just lends you out for a while. Come home gently. She paused. Come home gently, Maya. 5,000 feet. Dulles Airport filled the windshield. Maya could see the emergency vehicles now. Lines of fire trucks and ambulances on the taxiways, lights turning. She could see people standing at the edges of the tarmac. She could see the runway ahead, long and wide, approach lights blazing white down the center line. She thought about the 287 people behind her. Not numbers. People. The father in row 7 who had put his phone away. The woman holding a stranger's hand. The children. The people who had called home and said things they had been saving. 287 lives that go home tonight or do not. She thought, Uncle James, I promised. She thought, Mom, I am trying. She put her hands on the controls and flew the approach. 3,000 feet. Airspeed 144 knots. Descent rate 680 feet per minute. On center line. On glide slope. 2,000 feet. Voss said, you are exactly where you need to be. 1,500 feet. Maya could read the runway numbers now. 01R, she could see the touchdown zone. The thick white stripes painted on the dark asphalt. She could see exactly where she was going. 1,000 feet. Steady. Small corrections. Do not overcorrect. 500 feet. 400 feet. She began to prepare the flare. The flare is the final movement before landing. A gentle, Controlled pullback on the controls that raises the nose slightly and lets the rate of descent decrease so the aircraft does not hit the ground but settles onto it, the way a large bird folds its wings at the last moment before its feet find water. 300 feet. 200 feet. Back pressure, gentle. 100 feet. Nose rising. Runway rushing up. 50 feet. 30 feet. The main landing gear touched the runway. Both sets at almost exactly the same moment. A firm, solid double thump that ran through the entire airframe, through the seat, through Maya's hands on the controls. Not soft. Firm and real and absolutely certain. The aircraft was on the ground. She pushed the controls forward to bring the nose gear down. It touched with a single solid bump. She pulled the thrust reverse levers. The engines changed their sound completely, a deep roar that pushed back against the aircraft's momentum. She applied the brakes steadily, keeping it smooth. The aircraft slowed and slowed and slowed. And stopped. Pacific Coast Airlines Flight 2241. On the ground. Dulles International Airport. Every single person on board alive. For a moment there was only the sound of engines winding down and the distant sound of sirens. Then Lieutenant Colonel Voss said on the radio, Pacific Coast 2241, you are on the ground. Outstanding. Then the cabin erupted. The sound of 287 people who believe they were going to die and have just discovered they are not cannot be properly described. It is crying and cheering and prayer and laughter and people grabbing the hands of complete strangers and holding on. The father in row 7 was saying his children's names out loud. The woman who had been holding the stranger's hand was still holding it, both of them crying. Thomas Reyes stood outside the cockpit door with both hands over his face. In the first officer's seat, Maya Reeves sat very still. Her hands were shaking now. During the approach and the landing they had been completely steady because they had to be. Now the adrenaline was releasing and her hands were shaking and she let them shake. It was allowed. She had done it. Outside, the two F-22s came low over the runway together, wingtip to wingtip, and pulled straight up into a near vertical climb. The missing man formation. The aerial salute given for fallen pilots. But this time it was not for someone who was gone. This time it was for Ghost. Returned. Emergency medical teams came aboard immediately. Both pilots were taken to hospital. Both made complete recoveries. Both returned to flying. Captain Lim later wrote Maya a letter. She keeps it folded inside her notebook. Lieutenant Colonel Dana Voss taxied her F-22 onto a closed-service road and climbed out. She removed her helmet and walked toward the aircraft. Airport officers moved aside without knowing exactly why. They just moved. When Maya came down the boarding stairs into the noise and the light, she saw a woman in a flight suit walking toward her. Tall, dark hair, face carrying every year of service she had given to the Air Force. Her eyes were wet but she was not crying yet because she had decided she was not going to cry yet. Voss stopped in front of her. She looked at her for a long moment. She said, "You look exactly like her." Maya said, "People say that." The investigation took 4 weeks. The carbon monoxide leak was traced to an improperly replaced seal in the bleed air system during routine maintenance 11 days earlier. A maintenance error. Not sabotage. The airline grounded its A380 fleet for full inspection and found 2 other aircraft with similar issues. Both were fixed before they became emergencies. The question of Maya's identity was resolved quickly. Colonel Okoro had left meticulous documentation. 8 years of training logs. Video recordings of simulator sessions going back to when Maya was 9. Legal records. A complete account of every decision he had made and why. At the front of his personal journal, on the first page, written the morning after he found a 7-year-old girl alive in mountain wreckage that search teams had already given up on, was a single line. "Sarah, I found her. She is alive." I will keep her safe. I will teach her everything. I promise. He had kept it. Every single day for 8 years. 6 months after the landing, Maya Reeves is enrolled at the Air Force Youth Aviation Academy. She is the youngest student in the program's history. The exception was made without much debate. The review board read the incident report, reviewed the training logs, and watched 40 minutes of simulator recordings. One board member said that arguing about age in this particular case would be a waste of everyone's time. Lieutenant Colonel Dana Voss is now Maya's legal guardian. The paperwork took 3 months and involved more federal agencies than either of them expected. It is done. Maya lives in a house in Virginia. On the desk in her study is the photograph of her mother, restored and framed. The woman in the flight suit standing in front of the F-22, smiling very slightly, the way someone smiles when they are exactly where they want to be. On weekends, Voss takes Maya flying in a rented Cessna. Building real hours, the right way, from the beginning. Her first solo flight is on a Tuesday morning in March. Clear sky, light wind, perfect conditions. She takes off, flies one circuit of the airfield, and lands. When she climbs out, Voss is standing on the tarmac. Her arms are folded. Her face is very controlled. She is crying a little. She says, "Your mother did her first solo on a Tuesday too. I did not plan that." Maya says, "I know." She looks at the sky. "Uncle James told me." 7 months after the landing, on a clear morning, Maya stands at the Air Force Memorial in Arlington, Virginia. She finds her mother's name on the wall. She touches it. She says quietly, "Hi Mom. I made it. I kept the promise. I hope you can see it." She is quiet for a moment. Then she says, "Uncle James kept his promise too. Every single day." A general steps forward. Silver-haired, 30 years of service. He reaches into his jacket and produces a flight patch. Dark background, silver letters. One word. Ghost. He says, "The Air Force does not retire call signs lightly. And it does not bring them back without cause. You have given us cause. When you are ready, Ghost flies again." Maya takes the patch. She holds it. She says, "I am not her yet." The general says, "No. But you are becoming her in the way that matters. Not by copying what she did. By understanding why she did it." Voss puts a hand on Maya's shoulder. She says, "Your mother used to say one thing before every flight. She would check her aircraft, finish her walk-around, and she would say, 'Let's go make some sky.'" Maya looks up at the memorial spires reaching into the cold blue morning. She looks at the patch in her hand. She looks at her mother's name carved deep and permanent into the stone. She looks at the people around her who came to stand here on a cold morning because of what one woman gave and what her daughter carried forward. She says, "Let's go make some sky." 2 years after Pacific Coast Flight 2241 lands safely at Dulles, Maya Reeves is 17 years old. She has 380 logged hours in real aircraft. She is ranked first in her class. She has given talks and appeared in a documentary and declined many interviews because she does not believe the story is about her. A reporter once asked her what she would say to someone facing something that seemed impossible. Maya thought for a moment. She said, "I think we confuse impossible and difficult all the time. Impossible means it cannot be done. Difficult means it costs something to do it. Most things that look impossible are just very difficult. They cost practice, or years, or fear, or grief, or all of those things at once. But they can be done." She looked at the reporter. She said, "My mother flew missions people called impossible. Uncle James raised me and trained me in secret for 8 years. I landed a commercial aircraft when I was 15. None of those things felt impossible in the moment. They just felt necessary. And when something is necessary, you find a way." She paused. Figure out what is necessary. That is the whole answer. She walked outside. The sky above the base was clear and cold and blue, the kind of blue that goes on in every direction without stopping. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went inside to study. This story is dedicated to everyone who has ever been told they are too young, too small, or too inexperienced to matter. Maya Reeves is fictional. The truth she carries is not. Knowledge matters. Preparation matters. Promises made to people who are gone still matter. And the sky has never once cared how old you are. Ghost flies eternal. Fly safe. Come home. Make some sky.